Hey there, everyone. I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. Thanks for joining us for Weather Extra. Over the past week, we flipped the calendar from January to February, and the new month began with another round of beneficial rainfall, adding to the surplus of rain so far for the year. But we did have quite the weather swings throughout January, so we get Weather Extra kicked off this week by bringing in meteorologist Sean Bellafiore, who has a recap at what month number 1 of 2024 brought to us in Central Texas. Sean.
January 2024 was a back and forth month with not only a lot of rain for a couple of days, but of course with some bitter cold temperatures too. We started out with a decent amount of rain on January 2nd, then kind of quieted down in the rainfall department, switching gears to focus on the Arctic blast arriving right around Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Those frigid temperatures the following week turned into an ugly, cool and drippy week of weather before we closed the month out with spring-like warmth across Central Texas. In fact, our highest high temperature 77 degrees, coldest high temperature was 24. Such a huge difference from one part of the month to the other. And the average high temperature was 54.7 degrees. That is 4.4 degrees cooler than normal. The low temperatures were also cooler than normal as well, lowest of which was 12 degrees, which the highest of which was 49. The average low temperature for the month was 32.5 degrees. That is 3.3 degrees colder than normal. January set 3 cold high temperature records and 2 cold low temperature records as well. That period from January 14th to the 16th was actually the 15th coldest 3-day period in history, with an average high temperature of 27 degrees, and the average high and average low together. That brings us the 20th coldest average temperature in the month of January and the coldest since 2007. We did not lack in the rainfall department either, with multiple days with at least 1/10 of an inch of rain, 2 days with at least an inch of rain, including on January 2nd and January 22nd. 4.55 inches of rain. That was almost 2 inches more rain than we normally see in a January. We may have only set one rainfall record on January 22nd, but that was the first day we have seen 2 inches of rain since November 2022, and the 4.55 inches that fell makes it the 9th rainiest January in history and the rainiest January since 2013. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
I want to take you all the way back to last summer. This is when we had not terrible drought conditions, but with a deficit each month, we saw the drought get really extreme across Central Texas. In fact, you fast forward to September of last year, an extreme and exceptional drought took over much of the area. Now, with the recent rains and the rains that we saw to end off the year, the drought has been continually improving. We ended off last year with the drought no longer in Hillsborough and Corsicana, and with the rains that we saw in January, we now have no drought conditions from Meridian, Hillsborough, Waco, Marlin, Cameron, and then points towards the north and to the east. We still have a small little bubble here down towards Georgetown where we have extreme drought conditions. Hopefully we continue to see more rains with this El Nino winter and continues to chip away at the drought.
This past Friday was Groundhog Day, the day where Punxsutawney Phil emerges from his burrow in Pennsylvania to find out if he sees his shadow or not, which some say by tradition determines if we have 6 more weeks of winter or an early arrival of spring. If he sees his shadow, he predicts 6 more weeks of winter. If he doesn't, it's a forecast for an early spring. This year, Phil did not see his shadow, which again, according to tradition, means an early spring is on the way. Now you may be thinking, is his groundhog even accurate? Well, actually, no, not at all. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says Phil has no predictive skill. He's only gotten it right about 40% of the time. They also say you'd have more luck monitoring NOAA's seasonal temperature outlook instead. And speaking of NOAA's outlooks, here's what they're forecasting for the U.S. for the month of February right here behind me. Majority of the nation from the Red River up into the northern border is expected to see warmer than normal temperatures. Right here in Central Texas, we have equal chances at warmer or cooler than normal temperatures for the upcoming month. And taking a look at the precipitation forecast for February, the southern and central portions of the U.S., including us right here in Central Texas, are under this green color. That means we have a chance at above normal precipitation, thanks to the El Nino weather pattern. Now there is a drier weather forecast for the Pacific Northwest and up around the Great Lakes into New England. Well, Weather Extra will be right back with a very fascinating story on how doctors and scientists are raising pigs to help with the organ shortage. You don't want to miss it. Stick with us. Each day, 17 people in the U.S. die waiting to get a new organ. More than 100,000 people are on the nation's transplant waiting list. But what if there were another source of organs beyond humans? CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, got incredible, rare access to a research farm that is hoping to fill the gap with the help of pigs.
These pigs could one day provide a nearly endless supply of organs to save humans. Kidneys, hearts, livers. It's called xenotransplantation, and what you are watching at this research facility has never been seen by the public before.
We usually try to limit this to only the staff that takes care of the animals. We very rarely let other folks come in. Right?
Mike Curtis is my guide today. He is CEO of eGenesis. That's a company devoted to raising pigs to try and solve the organ shortage crisis.
Everything's controlled, like all of the feed is clean, water's clean. As you can see, the staff is clean. We try to maintain a very clean environment here.
And I should just point out that I walked into a room, turned on a filter, essentially cleaned the air for 5 minutes before I could then go shower. That's why my hair is wet. I've washed myself. I put on everything new here, including underwear, socks, shoes. Everything is different just to be in this room. Gives you an idea of just how clean it is in here and how important that is.
It's more than I typically do to prep for the operating room. All of it to protect the pigs from us.
I got to tell you, I did not know what to expect. It's powerful just to be here with these pigs.
These two and those three and the little guy here, they're fully edited. All these piglets can carry a total of 69 edits to their genome.
That makes them among the most genetically modified mammals on the planet.
How much change has to happen to that pig genome in order for it to actually become more compatible with the human?
Our approach is really three-pronged, where we're trying to reduce the risk of disease transmission from the porcine donor to human. We're editing in a way that reduces or eliminates rejection, and then we add genes to control rejection.
They do all of this with the help of CRISPR, the gene editing tool that allows scientists to manipulate the cell's DNA, knocking out or adding in genes, in this case to make a pig's organs more compatible with the human recipient.
To keep the consistency of the genetics, we establish the cell line and use cloning to produce consistent donors. It's akin to what was done with Dolly back in the 90s, cloning.
It is essentially a modern-day assembly line of standardized, genetically modified pigs.
We've selected the Yucatan mini pig because fully grown they're about 70 kilos, 150 pounds, right? So the organs are correctly sized for a human recipient.
You know, it's kind of amazing. As much as we talk about the really intricate science of gene editing, ultimately you got to get the size right.
That's right.
Less than 1% of the people who die every year die in a way that they could ever even be considered as organ donors. And so even if you optimize everything, there still wouldn't be enough organs. In the vascular wall.
Dr. Robert Montgomery is the director of the Transplant Institute at NYU Langone Health. He's also the recipient of a heart transplant.
I had a heart transplant 5 years ago. I had 7 cardiac arrests, and I still wasn't sick enough to be able to draw an organ.
That experience became a rallying cry for him.
We need a sustainable, renewable source of organs from something else other than humans dying.
Are animals the answer to that?
I think animals are the answer to that.
Specifically, pigs. Besides the size similarities, pigs also have several piglets with each pregnancy, making them a quickly scalable source of organs. One day, you might even see facilities like this all over the country.
We've been doing research on xenotransplantation for decades. Pig organs into monkeys, and doing gene edits, and that work has progressed. But there was still this question of, are those results translatable to a human?
Had we learned everything there was to learn about transplanting these organs into non-human primates?
I think there were diminishing returns.
The problem was the FDA still wasn't ready to give the green light to transplanting a pig organ into a human being. So Montgomery proposed a provocative idea. What if the first human recipient was brain dead?
their heart's still beating. They can be maintained on the ventilator, and you can really see what the human response is going to be.
On September 25, 2021, Montgomery performed the first ever genetically modified pig kidney transplant into a brain-dead human. And it worked for 54 hours. But each time they tried, the results got better and better.
We've done this 5 times. The first 4, 2 kidneys and 2 hearts were just for 3 days, but this last kidney was for 2 months. A much healthier looking.
He and his team shared the findings from their last patient with me.
See that red?
Yes.
That's hemorrhage. We did have a mild rejection, and we were able to test to make sure that we can treat that, using sort of conventional anti-rejection drugs.
Then, in January of 2022, for the first time in history, a team at the University of Maryland Medical Center transplanted a genetically modified pig heart into a living human being, someone who was not brain dead. It was allowed by the FDA's compassionate use pathway for experimental treatments, something used when a patient has no other options left.
Right, a patient imminently facing death. Why wouldn't you try?
But how far are we still to this becoming a reality?
I think for the right patient, we're going to see it in the next couple of years. Oh, it's amazing.
Pigs that could save human lives.
So these are large whites. These are the sows that we use to do the embryo transfers in.
I never expected to feel like I was immersed in a really scientific sort of place in the middle of a pig barn.
There's the equivalent of 5 or 6 Nobel Prize discoveries. Cloning is one of them. The discovery of CRISPR is another one. Allotransplantation, all Nobel Prize winning discoveries. We're integrating all of those to make this a reality.
Central Texas is located in an area known as Tornado Alley, known for severe weather and tornadoes. But have you ever heard of Dixie Alley? Well, coming up next on Weather Extra, Brady Taylor helps us learn more about what Dixie Alley is and this week's Degrees of Science. We'll be right back with much more.
Welcome into this week's Degrees of Science. Most folks have heard of Tornado Alley in the Central Plains where we see a lot of tornadoes, but you may have never heard of Dixie Alley. Well, today we're going to talk about that. We've got Wes White, the chief meteorologist at WBRC in Birmingham, Alabama. Wes, thanks for jumping on with us. So for people that don't know, let's talk geography first. Where exactly would you classify Dixie Alley to be?
Well, it typically starts over South Mississippi and then works its way through central Alabama. And even in the northern parts of Georgia, I've seen a lot of long track supercell thunderstorms that produce tornadoes across Mississippi, Alabama, but continue north of Atlanta.
So is there a certain time of year? I know in Tornado Alley, it's mainly April, May, June. That's kind of the peak of the season. What time of year do y'all usually see the peak of y'all's severe weather and tornado season?
Well, typically we see the peak of our season. There's a late fall, early winter season where we will see a peak in activity. And then again, as you get into the springtime, you'll see another peak in activity. But quite honestly, you can have severe weather in this alley any time of the year if the conditions are favorable. I mean, I remember back in 2005, the year, I'm sure when you guys were watching Hurricane Rita moving into Texas during that year, what was left of that system actually moved into September, and we ended up with 11 tornadoes in Tuscaloosa County alone in one day. 11 tornadoes. They were low-end tornadoes, but it just goes to show that even in September, the fall, when it's dry, when it's not as active, we can still have tornadoes if those conditions are favorable.
How hard is it on your job? A lot of people kind of know springtime and severe weather to keep your viewers and your residents in your area kind of weather aware for these kind of off-season style storms.
Brady, it's all the time. We are promoting weather awareness, weather safety. So it's an everyday thing. We actually had a situation here a couple of years ago where we had a marginal risk for severe weather, and we ended up with an EF3 tornado that touched down in Jefferson County. That's where Birmingham, Alabama is located, in Jefferson County, and it was just north of Birmingham. Major damage. I mean, you can imagine an EF3 in the middle of the night, and that's one of the reasons why we have a very high injury fatality rate, is because of these overnight tornadoes. That's just one of the many factors. But you never want to see severe weather overnight, but it seems like a lot of our weather, by the time it gets over here, it's more of an overnight event that we deal with here in Alabama.
What are a couple of the big events that you've worked that just come to the top of your mind?
Well, the first big event, I got into this business around 2000. During that time, we had at the time it was the F4 before the enhanced Vegeta scale touchdown in Tuscaloosa. It was an F4 tornado, and it struck right in where I grew up, went to high school, and you know what I'm talking about. When you go out into these communities after something like that, and especially in an area that's close to home, and you just see, your neighbors suffering, people injured, just devastation. And this happened December 16th. So, I mean, this is right before Christmas. So, you see in all the rubble Christmas trees, and it was just unbelievable. We had 11 fatalities in Tuscaloosa on that day. And, there's just a sickening feeling. And just ever since then, it just kind of set the tone for, my outlook on severe weather. Before then, I was, kind of a junior woodchuck meteorologist and didn't mind doing a little bit of storm chasing, but I really got it. I got a very sobering reminder of just how serious these events can be. April 27th, 2011, we had 62 tornadoes in Alabama on that day, and I could write a book on that. And we ended up that morning, we had multiple tornadoes. We had fatalities. It was just an unbelievable event during the morning. And then that afternoon round, and you don't have to look far to see some of the scenes and what happened that day. We had F5 that moved through our far northwest county, moved out of Smithville, Mississippi. It was an EF5. We had 3 EF4s that day. I never would have dreamed that, but see 62, in one day and that many. I mean, there was one point where we had 2 EF4s that were tracking at one time, and we simply had to go to one because it was impacting the more populated zone. So we stayed on it more frequently, the one that was moving from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham.
To hear more about Dixie Alley, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube or go to KWTX.com/degreesscience. Straight ahead on Weather Extra, the changing climate is having direct impacts on the seafood industry. And right after the break, we'll dive into how the change in climate is creating bigger holes in our pockets. Welcome back to Weather Extra. It's crawfish season here in the Lone Star State, but the season might not go according to plan thanks to the drought and the triple-digit temperatures over the summer. Early reports from crawfish farmers in Louisiana, the top crawfish producers, estimate crawfish ponds shrink by about 100,000 acres. One area businessman who imports crawfish says the weather is to blame. As a result, crawfish season is here and their freezers are still empty. And when the crawfish finally do arrive, you can expect a hefty price tag.
This time last year, we were selling crawfish for just under $5 a pound. The market in Louisiana right now is closer to $9.
He says usually crawfish season starts in January and ends around June. On to another seafood-related topic. Over the past few years, billions of snow crabs have vanished from the ocean around Alaska, and scientists think they finally know why. They believe that the crabs either died of starvation or moved due to warmer water temperatures. Snow crabs normally live in water that is close to freezing. Starting in 2018, water in the Bering Sea had a 2-year heat wave, which caused the crabs' metabolism to speed up and required them to eat more. Scientists say their caloric needs probably increased as much as 4 times. And there just wasn't enough food for them. Also, warming temperatures allowed Pacific cod to enter waters where the crabs lived, and those fish likely ate many of the crabs. And now for a second year in a row, Alaska's world-famous snow crab season has been canceled. CBS's Jonathan Vigliotti reports on the efforts to save the species and the family businesses that depend on the vital crab industry.
Alaska's Kodiak Archipelago is known for its catch of the day. While Gabriel Prout is grateful for his modest haul of king crab, it's the vanishing of another variety that has this fishing port bracing for financial fallout.
We're still definitely in survival mode, trying to find a way to stay in business.
Last season, when we first met Prout, confusion.
Where have the snow crab gone?
Now, a sense of panic in the state's fisheries, which produce 60% of the nation's seafood.
It's just still extremely difficult to fathom how we go from a healthy population in the Bering Sea to 2 closures in a row.
While Proud is barely holding on, others, like Joshua Songstad, have lost everything.
All of a sudden now I'm at home with no income and really not much to do.
The crisis first began in early 2022 after biologists discovered an estimated 10 billion crabs disappeared, a 90% plunge in the population.
When you first saw the results in 2021, what went on in your mind?
The first reaction was, is this real? You know, we looked at it was almost a flat line.
Ben Daly with Alaska Department of Fish and Game assisted in the search.
Environmental conditions are changing rapidly.
According to new research from NOAA, a marine heat wave linked to climate change likely impacted their food supply and drove them to starvation.
Look for causes.
Biologists hope this second round of suspensions will give the remaining snow crab population time to bulk back up. But with the climate threat only growing, there's concern the snow crabs, along with the industry that depends on them, will continue to shrink.
I'm a fourth generation fisherman. If we keep going the way we're going, there's not going to be any of us left.
For Eye on America, Jonathan Vigliotti, Kodiak Island, Alaska.
That's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. Tune in again next weekend for another half hour of nothing but weather and science. We'll see you then. Have a great week.